Picture this as millions gather round their Christmas tables deep within the labyrinthine Time Hotel. The Doctor encounters a puzzle that transcends the ordinary boundaries of time. Behind each door awaits a different era of history, every threshold beckoning with untold adventures. The BBC's latest Doctor Who Christmas special brings Ncuti Gatwa's 15th Doctor back for his second seasonal outing following last year's encounter with the Goblins. This year's tale pairs Steven Moffat's return with the newcomer Nicola Coughlan. I can't say these names, I'm afraid. But anyway, it promises to illuminate the mysteriousness of Christmas or something. What truths lurk within the passages of this otherworldly establishment, and why has the Doctor been drawn to this singular crossroads on the most celebratory day of days? I should say this video is going to contain spoilers, so if you haven't seen it yet, please do go and watch the show before coming back and watching this video. What was Joy to the World like? Well, let's find out as we go beyond the sofa. Before we start, I just want to let people know I accidentally wrote a bit of fan fiction. It's a Fourth Doctor story where he and Sarah Jane have to visit a German town at Christmas time with things that aren't quite what they seem. It's called Krampusnacht, and the download for the PDF is below. There's no having to sign up for anything. Just go and download it as my Christmas present to everybody who watches this video. I hope you have a very Merry Christmas. So, where are we with this episode? Well, I feel like I've been saying this for quite some time now, but I'm not a fan of Doctor Who Christmas specials. I fully recognise their place that they share in people's hearts. And, you know, after Doctor Who started again about 20 years ago, a little bit more. So there are people who grew up with this series who are now reaching adulthood, and to them, the Christmas episodes, they became a stalwart of the festive season. For those of us born in earlier eras, we never really had that festive excitement of an episode of Doctor Who, and some of the trappings that have grown up around these specials kind of take me away from the story a bit. The fact that we lose the companion every year, the fact that we have to have some sort of guest star, it has a meta-narrative which doesn't always lend itself to the sorts of stories that Doctor Who is best at telling. However, I completely understand why these Christmas specials have become such a big deal for Doctor Who fans. I did miss them when they weren't there, and the subsequent New Year specials just, well, they didn't feel the same. And even though I can take or leave most of the Christmas specials, they really do have their place within the mythology of the series and the fandom as well. So, you know, I approached Joy to the World wanting it to be the best version of Doctor Who that it could be. What we got, however, is something that I'm a little bit torn on. I want to really like it, and I think that there's a lot of good things in here, but there's also a lot of things that are just pulling me away from this story and taking me out of the narrative at the same time. I suppose it's difficult when you deal with death in the way that Doctor Who does, to remember that there are people who have had to deal with death very recently and perhaps don't want to be remembered of the very human deaths that we all have to deal with on a daily basis. But perhaps I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Let's begin where every Doctor Who story begins, where the Doctor finds himself in a time hotel and notices, and he doesn't always find himself in a time hotel. I'm just at this, in this story, there's a time hotel and a suspicious figure who's carrying a briefcase with a chain handcuffed to him, and that sets in motion the whole series of events where the briefcase jumps from person to person, imbuing them with some sort of sentience contained within the case. Those who were left behind disintegrated, but due to the Doctor's meddling, at least in part, the suitcase finds itself attached to a short woman named Joy, who really shouldn't have had anything to do with the story. In a pretty convoluted, non-paradoxical paradox, a future version of the Doctor tells the Doctor what a particular passcode is in order to save Joy's life, and then the new version of the Doctor whisks Joy away, and the old version of the Doctor is stuck to live for a year on his own in a hotel. If it sounds a little bit convoluted, well, it feels a little bit convoluted as well. At this time in the hotel, he meets a woman who he forms a relationship with, where every week they sit down for their chair day, which basically seems like some sort of board game night. And then a year later, he leaves to go back to the Time Hotel in order to tell himself what the code was, whisk Joy away, and leave himself behind. You might think that this is typical of Steven Moffat. It's a typical Moffat episode. I suppose really it is. I don't know whether it's because it's Christmas, but something feels like it's missing here. Even though it's a fairly simple plot to understand, it's such a tiny story that I think the balance of the episode is off. I've said it before with certain episodes. When one thing is imbalanced, it throws everything else off. In Joy to the World, that imbalance comes from an overabundance of emotional story plots. We take a whole section out of the story just to explore the Doctor's time on Earth. And I actually found that bit quite interesting. I preferred the relationship between the Doctor and I can't even remember her name. Isn't that bad? Anyway, I preferred that relationship to the one between the Doctor and Joy. And, Joy was really promoted as being the Christmas companion, and that kind of didn't sit well with me, I guess. We also have these heavy emotional beats as the Doctor leaves, when Joy is being berated, really, by the Doctor. And at the end, when Joy becomes the star... I did say this review was going to contain spoilers, right? Anyway, the upshot is that these things take you out of the story, and whilst they're actually quite good in many respects, I feel that they've been overused in this instance. Too many at one time in too short a space of time. What I did like was the way that we see the Doctor being actually quite nasty, manipulative in the way that he gets Joy to become angry. There's also a rather nice metaphor there about having to control your anger in order to relieve yourself of baggage. But I don't know if that was actually meant to be in there or if it's something that I'm reading into it. I don't know. That section where Joy does get angry and has to confront the reality of her own existence is actually quite nice. But it's also a very heavy subject to have to deal with on Christmas Day, especially for those of us who are mourning the loss of loved ones. I lost my father a few years back now, and it's at times like Christmas when that loss is felt the greatest. With the best will in the world, I don't want to tune into Doctor Who to confront that loss again, especially in such an emotive storyline, which is clearly hinting at what we all had to go through over COVID. It was an awful time, and it's definitely left a scar on a lot of people. There are people out there who still can't return to normal and may never be able to lead a normal life again. We turn to shows like Doctor Who when we want to escape this. We return to it when we want to be able to say, hey, maybe everything will be okay in the end. But unfortunately, I think that this does the opposite. It's been commented on before that Steven Moffat doesn't like to have characters that die. He likes to have some sort of redemption where those characters can find some other sort of peace. And it can work at times. The Doctor dances and the Empty Child, I think that worked really well. But I think here it feels very convoluted, possibly because of the way the plot has unfolded. Dealing with death through characters that make sacrifices or who are hoisted by their own petard is one thing. That's what the show's done pretty much since its inception. It's not often when you actually deal with a very real, a very emotional sense of grief on Doctor Who. Not to this extent, and certainly not on Christmas Day. There was an idea, I suppose, that this should have been a beautiful moment where the singularity that is Joy takes away her mother so they can be reunited again, but it just didn't work for me. There's some good things about this. The acting's good, the effects are fine, the dinosaur in it, which is always going to be interesting, that's good. But to some extent, I just didn't care. I was so taken out of the storyline by the previous one, the Joy storyline, I should say, by the previous one, that the stakes seemed to have just disappeared, just completely diminished. Anita, that's what her name was, Anita. That storyline was so much more interesting with the Doctor having to live day to day than the MacGuffin device that was always going to go off at some point and at some time, which you knew the Doctor was going to stop. Except and I've noticed this about recent Doctor Who, the Doctor didn't save the day at all. He was possibly a catalyst, but it was all left up to Joy to save the day herself. It wasn't something that she decided to do. It was something that she kind of fell into. This doesn't really feel like good narrative closure. What was the thing that the Doctor did that required him to be the protagonist of the story? I need to talk about the good bits here as well, because there were good bits about the episode. I don't want to come across as too much of a nihilist in that respect. I liked the acting. I loved Ncuti's Doctor and what he's doing with the part. I think that's brilliant. I loved Anita as a character, and the relationship that they had together I thought was brilliant. I thought that was a really interesting thing to explore. I did think it would have been better if this was written as fan fiction or as part of a novel, because it brought you out of the main narrative. If this was an extra on a DVD, fantastic. But as part of the main narrative, it didn't quite work for me. But the relationship there felt a lot truer than the relationship between the rest of the characters. What I would have liked to have seen, if I'm being honest, is the old Doctor putting the code in the briefcase and then the new Doctor taking Joy away, and then we leave the old Doctor and we just don't know what happened to him in that intervening year. And that could be explored later or in different mediums. But we just keep going with the story in a new version of the old Doctor. Actually, that was a really nice bit when Ncuti had to talk to himself. I think that worked really well, and it's something that could have fallen by the wayside. The effects are good. The dinosaurs are excellent. Seeing Silurians again and knowing what's coming in the next few years, I was also quite interested in seeing what would happen with that. Nothing much, as it turned out. But I suppose it's a little bit of a nod to what's coming up. The basic premise of whoever takes the briefcase gets killed, I thought that worked really well. The sticking point with me that it was completely destroyed by the time we get to the end, and we realise that those people who have been killed have really just been taken up and have become part of the Star. I will say something about the Christian element of this. I did think that it was somewhat predictable that Joy became the Star of Bethlehem. I know there were going to be people out there who are not happy about this, because for them, that's a very significant moment in their belief system. And I also think that we should be allowed to play around with these things in order to have, well, fun. I describe myself as an apathetic agnostic. I don't know and I don't care. But I'm aware that there are people that do care about this and will find it disrespectful. On a normal day, I think it would be perfectly fine to say that you're just, exploring the narrative, exploring science fiction ideas. But it's not a normal day. It's Christmas Day, and it does feel kind of unfair to those who are celebrating their religion today. If we're really going to live by the mantra that Doctor Who is for all, then we need to live by that mantra and possibly not be blinded by it when it's our own connection to a culture and we think, oh, we can do whatever we want to this. Let's face it, we would never have the Doctor go back and visit Muhammad for very good reasons. We respect the Islamic religion enough to know how disrespectful that would be. But because we've been brought up in Christianity, as that's been our baseline, I think we sometimes forget that the trappings of that religion is just as important as the trappings of any other religion to any other civilization. So like I said at the beginning of this video, this has left me with mixed feelings. Part of me enjoyed the bits that were enjoyable. I laughed out loud at least twice. I suspect that things were meant to be funny that I laughed at. I'm not sure. I'm not entirely sure. The other part of me feels a bit like it feels like I've gone through a mangle, really, because it did make me confront things that I really didn't want to confront this year. And not to put too fine a point in it, I've had a bad time over the last few years. I've had to go through 18 different funerals, which have been tough. And so when I tune into something for escapism, I really want to feel that escapism. And I didn't quite get that with Joy to the World. And although there's a lot of it that I appreciate, those things, they just really take a back seat to the things that have drawn me out of this story. And that's what I think. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below. And do go and download that fan fiction that I wrote. I hope you like it. That's it for this particular video. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it hasn't seemed too maudlin. I should say I'm looking forward to the new season. I'm looking forward to the new companion. They look great. And the clips that we saw at the end in the trailer that make it seem like their story is going to be really interesting. So brilliant. I'm looking forward to that. Looking forward to seeing Ruby again and Unit. And, I haven't given up on this Doctor. I know some people have, but I think he's excellent. And I'm looking forward to seeing where we go. The last season, by and large, was pretty good. Let's have more of that, please. And when we do, I hope that you will come and join me as I take a look at those shows and we go beyond the sofa.